to another episode of Modern Prospecting Podcast. Our guest today is Will Fuentes from Maestro Group. I've gotten to know Will over the last year, and I've been really impressed by what he's built at Maestro. So, Will, welcome, and love to, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about Maestro.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Will Fuentes, managing partner and founder of the Maestro Group. We'll celebrate 10 years in August of this year coming up, so super excited about it. Essentially, we are a sales acceleration firm. We really focus on reducing sales cycles, increasing win rates, and increasing deal size by training people on the science of decision-making using behavioral psychology as well as industrial organizational psychology. Worked with about 700 clients over those 10 years. Wow. And have had a fantastic time helping entrepreneurs reach new heights when it comes to revenue generation.
Yeah. So, but that's a great intro. But love to get a little more background. Like, what made you start Maestro Group? Like, what was the inspiration? What do you do before? Give us a little view into that.
Yeah. I'm glad you asked. So I actually have had a very circuitous path to this point in my life. So I went to law school and failed the bar, and was really trying to figure out what to do. And went to work for I had a job with a big firm, and obviously after you fail the bar, they don't give you that job anymore. So I went to work for a small firm where I had a really good relationship. I had worked with them through college and law school. And while I was doing that, was looking to supplement my income, and ended up working part-time at Best Buy for the holidays. So my brother, who's a lot younger than me, was like, hey, listen, you get an awesome discount. He's 10 years younger than me. He's like, it'll be fun. We'll work together. We'll enjoy some time. He's like, it's just nights and weekends, and it's just for the holidays. I ended up falling in love with sales and retail, and was lucky enough that I was at a store that was focused on customer centricity. So really, at the time, it was a transformative concept started by Larry Selden out of Columbia University. Best Buy was really buying into it in their war against Circuit City. And because of that, we were in a test store. We got visits from executives all the time. And one of the executives was the COO of Best Buy. And he became a mentor of mine. And so I ended up in retail because of him. He said, hey, you're doing a fantastic job here. Love it. You should join full time. I actually thought it meant I was going to go to corporate because I had a law degree. What it actually meant was I was going to make $9 an hour and get benefits. I was a full-time employee, not a holiday employee. But he did mentor me, and I ended up in the long career in retail, and was really good at moving inventory quickly, specifically at risk or end of life inventory. Decided I wanted to start a company, so started a software company based on the methodologies that I use. It's a little bit ahead of our time, but I was able to create a really great network of people. And as I left that company, I started consulting to sales teams on the side, how to penetrate accounts, how to create opportunities, how to network, how to leverage second and tertiary connections to be able to get to stakeholders and decision makers. And there was a company that really liked what they were hearing, and they hired me to consult. And so I was consulting for them from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m., training their sales team, and then regular job from 9 to 5. And then that company hired me. And I lasted a month. So I was an amazing consultant, an amazing client relationship. But you know how it is, an entrepreneur, sometimes it's difficult to tell them how to do things. And so, for a month, the CEO and I just, we realized after a month that it just wasn't going to work. We both had very distinct ideas of what we wanted to do and how we wanted to do it. So on my son's first day of kindergarten, I got fired. And on that day, I decided I was going to start Maestro Group. I called my wife, and felt sorry for myself for about 4.5 seconds, as long as it took me to get to the car after getting fired, because we were outside at a cafe when I got fired. Very Jerry Maguire.
Oh my goodness!
I walked to the car, and I get in the car. I call my wife. I said, "Hey, listen, I'm never going to work for anybody else. I'm going to start a company. I don't have a ton of money, but can I take half of it to start this thing? Because I have a unique idea of what I want to do." And she comes from immigrant family, entrepreneurial family as well. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, she's like, you always bet on yourself, right? Like, that's the only way
Yeah,
to do
that's
this thing.
great. I mean, like when you said, "Hey, I had this brief period where I felt sorry for myself." That's exactly what being an entrepreneur is. You get the ups and downs, but you have like very little time to feel sorry for yourself, right? So I love your story, and the reason I thought it's really interesting is obviously this podcast is about prospecting, about building pipeline in this what I think is a sort of like the modern environment, which is somewhat different, and we'll get into that. But I had based on your story, I had one question. Like,
Yes.
was there anything? What did you take from retail sales that you immediately said applied in B2B?
Structure and frameworks. So, in retail, one of the things that I, had to do was hire a bunch of kids, essentially 16, 17-year-old kids that were in high school, right? And had to be able to deliver a great customer experience to everyone that walked in my door.
Yeah.
And leaving people to their own devices at whatever age is very difficult. You're going to get just this wide variety of what's going to happen. Also, you get a wide variety of success, right? So it's going to be fairly dependent on personality and whatever else. But if you can create a structure and a framework around how people ask questions, what questions they ask, how they get people to identify the value of what you're showing them, then you're able to drive a pretty consistent experience. And so what would be most interesting about retail, right, is I could look at month over month and, you're within a couple basis points, like from year over year, literally on a day by day basis of like dollars and revenue and everything else. I mean, people are consistent in their behaviors. And if you create consistent process to interact in that behavior, you can deliver forecastable results.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a huge learning for me. And it was funny because I think initially a lot of the clients were slightly skeptical of this idea, right? They thought sales and prospecting was art, right? Not necessarily a science, right? But the reality is that human connection, human communication is science. It is absolutely science. And so process is what delivers consistent results. And the reason the best retailers, are the best retailers is they deliver a consistent level of service across all of their locations and their people, et cetera, right? You walk into Nordstrom, wear a white glove, and I go touch the shoes. You won't find dust.
Yeah. And retail brands have invested so much in the sales side, right? That we don't, in terms of like what you're saying, behavioral analytics and kind of using data. Okay, let's talk about prospecting. I know you deal across the entire spectrum of selling, but I'm particularly interested in prospecting because I happen to have a belief that it's the most volatile and difficult part of selling today. I don't know if you'd agree, and you don't have to, but that's what I think. So I'm kind of curious, like from your perspective, how has it changed, like in the last 3 to 5 years? But so anyway, love to hear your
So
thoughts.
first and foremost, I 100% agree. It is one of the reasons for us. And by the way, again, I'll give you an example of something that happened to me early in my retail career that still holds true to this day because it's so volatile, right? Prospecting. So prospecting, like marketing, top of the funnel, getting foot traffic in the door is very difficult. Right. And like I said, things are consistent, right? Traffic patterns are consistent. How many people come in, whatever is consistent. And I recall one day saying to my mentor, saying, "Hey, I need you to spend more money so I can get more foot traffic." And he looked at me and said, "Listen, you should just take care of the people that are walking through the door better and sell more to them, because I can't really control how the marketing's actually going to influence all of that foot traffic." Right. And so I still think about that to this day when it comes around prospecting. I try to get down to how much I can control in terms of connection and in terms of connection with people to be able to bring them into my funnel. It has changed so dramatically. Right. So here's the thing, right? It's like years ago, right? 3 to 5 years ago, right? Everybody went, obviously remote, right? Everybody's going
Right.
remote, right? And so what happens, right? So all of a sudden, right, we're reaching out to people via, cell phone numbers become super important, right? Because people are not at home. Email becomes super important, right? And so, well, then what ends up happening is people end up flooding into those areas to create technologies that will amplify those efforts.
Yeah.
Right. And so years ago, right, like we're using kind of a 16, 17, 18 step cadence that connects, LinkedIn, phone, office phone, and emails. Well, I mean, I don't know about you, but the amount of emails that I get
Yeah.
today and how difficult. And so today, I think this idea of like mass emailing outside of thinking of it as almost like a brand awareness, almost like a subconscious dripping.
Yeah. Like the way ads were used before. Yeah.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. Right. And that's a massive change.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is, they always say what is a history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. Right. And so I feel like this is happening again in terms of how we start to prospect today and how we're thinking about it. Right. Like the idea of signals, the idea of relevancy becomes way more important today than at any other point, I think, in modern B2B like prospecting.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Obviously we believe it, and I've often said, kind of like at 20,000 feet, every sales team looks the same, but then at the ground level, every sales team operates differently. They have different signals. Your business, in your category is unique, so you have to find the signals that matter to you, and actually, do the hard work of figuring that out. But when you look at your clients, and I know you work with a bunch of them, and what's working today? So we just talked about like, okay, that doesn't the old thing then, and I know there was a time where you could just get a parallel dialer and just hammer the heck out of that. Is what's actually working today? And you mentioned signals. Give a few examples, thoughts on among your clients, the clients that you see, the ones that are successful. What are they doing right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things. So number one is I will tell you the phone still works. So pick up the phone, people. Like you really should pick up the phone. Now, if you add like signal-based messaging around who you're picking up the phone to, that becomes incredibly powerful, right? Like that becomes incredibly powerful. But so a lot of my clients, where they're really focusing on is understanding layers of signals, right? So here's a great example. Okay, someone does a bunch of layoffs, right? And so great, that's a signal. We see it, it's announced, right? It's like, well, what does that mean? What can mean many things, right? So now we got to combine that with what we know out of their public reports and what we can identify, right? If they are growing, but they actually just went through a massive riff, right? And they've now said as a priority is AI, then are they getting rid of like, AI defiant people and trying to bring in, AI advocates into the company, right? Are they looking for that? That's a signal, right? That is a signal for me to identify and to start to make the connection. I think often people will say job change. That's a signal. Okay. Yeah, it is. But like, what's the depth of relevancy to that? So the ones that are doing the best are not just taking a signal and, heading off into the battle, right? Heading off into the conversation. They're investigating and saying, okay, what is this actually really telling me and what is really going on in the organization? There's a depth of understanding of companies before they're reaching out. Just the same way that B2B buyers have a depth of understanding of your company or your category before they reach out to you, we should be doing the same on the prospecting side. And so the ones that are really successful are doing that on the prospecting side. They're saying, okay, I'm gonna limit down. I'm gonna bring down the amount of people that I'm gonna be reaching out to, but I'm gonna be reaching out to them with much more depth and understanding about what is going on, and making it much more relevant.
Yeah, and precision. And I think one of the things you said was it's not necessarily any one signal. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's the layering. It's the connection between two signals. I actually like your example because obviously we all want to sell to growing companies, right? And so we might see where a company has laid off a bunch of people, but at the same time they're hiring AI engineers or what. Actually, they're not shrinking the business, they're retooling, right? And it's right. The interpretation of that I think it's a great example, which sort of like brings us to this point. Like AI, go to market. What are you, you've been in this for a while. You've, as you said, over 700 clients over 10 years. How, big picture, how are you seeing AI impacting sales? Like what are you seeing? What are you feeling about this? Is it a threat? Is it like, hey, this is opportunity? What, just big picture, what are your thoughts?
Big picture, it is a threat to low performers and mediocre performers.
Mm.
Absolutely. Right. Like, what's the point of paying you when I can get mediocre performance out of AI? Like, and a lot of the tools do deliver mediocre performance because they're not, people are, it's not as simple as like, set it and forget it, right? It's not like the Ronco rotisserie chicken like machine, right? It's like you actually have to do something with it. And so I do think it is a threat to them. I do think it's a force multiplier to the top performers, the ones that have, again, and I'll go back to process, everything from prospecting, right? So I'm a big believer in AEs continuing to prospect as if they were BDRs. I don't think that that's a skill that they should ever lose. I have this saying, right? It's like, no one's ever going to determine what my kid's going to eat. And what that means is like, I'm going to leave it up to myself to create the opportunities to generate for my company, right? I'm just not going to leave it out there. And I feel that AE should interact that way with their business as well. It's like, great, I'm glad I'm getting leads, but I should still be prospecting, right? But so the reality is that I think those top performers are looking at AI and saying, okay, I do a lot of things really, really well. How do I now create, agents that allow me to do those things and like optimize and maximize and do more of those things? So then the things that I'm actually excellent at, which is being in a meeting, listening, connecting, all of those things, I can do more of that.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think like that's where I see it. Same with like some of the best prospectors, right? It's like I identify with those that are looking at their process and being like, okay, like, yeah, I may be great at this, but like if an agent does, it's just as good, right? Just as good as me, right? And so offloading that work so they can do some of the stuff that I was just talking about, right? Like the best prospectors are looking multiple layers of signals, are thinking through like how do I make it much more relevant? How do I get much more precise in my messaging? And so that's where I think the big difference is happening between in sales, right? I know for a fact, because I've done this with multiple teams. Years ago, we did it with workflows, right? Just simple workflows of like, automating some stuff, right? Like just thinking about like automating. Simple one is a great example of this is automating CRM hygiene, getting stuff into CRM, right? Like years ago, like, I had clients that like, it just took a long time to get everything in there and blah, blah, blah. And so, people couldn't handle that many accounts. There was all these requirements, right? So then technology came in and all of a sudden it didn't take me, 22 salespeople to manage that pipeline. I could do it with 8. And this is a real world example, by the way. We had, a company that had 22 and then we managed it with 8. We kept the 8 top performers and they actually 3x the revenue of the previous year of the 22.
Wow.
Right.
That's amazing.
Because we took away the administrative burden. So I do think that's a bit of that. I also think, and I've heard, onboarding AI is, obviously companies are using it, but I'm hearing of BDRs and AEs using AI to onboard themselves that much faster. Right. So they're taking calls of their peers, they're taking industry news, they're taking podcasts, and then like bringing that down and then using Notebook LM to create their own podcast to listen to on the drive into work to become much more of an industry expert than they could ever be. So I like, again.
Yeah. So
I do think it's an amplification.
Accelerates the learning process, gets them up to speed faster. You actually said along the way, something that I'm kind of curious about. You were talking about the example, like you were saying, no one's ever going to determine whether my kids eat or, as an AE, you got to prospect. What I think is interesting though, is we've had, that's not a prevalent sort of mindset among AEs, especially those that have come into the industry in the last 10 years where they've been fed leads. And I've started to see some trend, even among our customers, where they're moving more towards a full cycle AE. So not all of them, that's still a minority, but there seems to be a little bit of trend where people are trying that. So what does what does this say about like the role of the SDR, and how does AI sort of affect organizationally how a sales organization might be structured? Is our SDRs, which I actually happen to believe in, but are SDRs relevant, or are their roles changing? Do we just need fewer? What do you think is going on there?
So obviously, I think the roles are changing. I do think I don't necessarily think we need fewer, right? I do think we need to again amplify what they're doing and then really focus on the high value tasks and activities that
Mm.
matter, right? And leverage AI to teach them how to do those things better, score them on doing those things better, and then again help them do some of those things, the administrative stuff, the research stuff, right? The depth of understanding, all of those things. And just because you have a full sales cycle AE, I don't think it diminishes the role, honestly,
Mhm.
of the SDR. I think the reality is we've had a lot of clients. Of those clients, I've managed a ton of their sales team for some period of time, right? Whether it's a month, whether it's 6 months or 9 months, and every time I go in, except for I think I can count on my hand on one hand the number of times where I didn't implement it. I made sure that every single AE became a full sales cycle AE.
Mm.
They were required to generate about anywhere between 10 to 25% of their pipeline. Now, why such a small number? And the reality is this: is that when you have an AE that's really good, right? They are actually going to work a deal and spend a lot of time being strategic in that deal. And so
Mhm.
you can't rely on them to create all of the pipeline all of the time to be able to do it. So you still need the SDR role, right? You still need to be able to hand them something in
Yeah.
order to achieve those revenue and growth goals. And this is where this is why I love sales, prospecting, and all of the whole cycle is it's a math problem. It's a math problem bound by time and effort. And
Mhm.
so people don't think about that, right? And so the SDRs are the ones that allow you to get extra time to be able to do all of the activities
All right.
that you're requiring of the AE, right? So that's to me is
Yeah.
I don't think it's going away. I
No,
actually think we're just going to get smarter about it.
I actually happen to agree, and in fact, I would, I started earlier. I said I think the most difficult and volatile part of selling is prospecting. So to me, it only reasons that actually you need better and smarter SDRs, right?
Yeah.
So if you're talking about an SDR that's just basically, I'm blindly going on, just doing my, couple hundred dials a day, I'm on autopilot. I'm not. You actually, we want the AE to think strategically, to think intelligently. Actually, you need that of the SDR as well, because it's the most difficult part of selling, in my opinion, today. So you need someone to actually be thinking about what are the different methods that I can employ to actually test different channels, to test different messaging, and that takes time. Tools make it a lot easier, and I think AI does make it easier to do your testing, but you still need someone day in and day out just thinking about that, cracking the code, because it's volatile.
Yeah, it is volatile, and it always surprises me just how unimportant some executives think the SDR function can be, in terms of how they think about who they're hiring. And I
Yeah.
always tell them is this is a brand representation of you. This is a first conversation, right? How if first impressions matter. I mean, they really do matter,
Yeah.
right? So how the email is crafted, how, again, let's go back to how precise they are in their language, how they sell the value of this next 20 or 30 minutes that they will spend with your company really matters. And we can again make people better with technology.
Yeah.
But we have to find good people to execute using that
Absolutely.
technology.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. When my last company, Triblio, when we would do company meetings, and yeah, every month we bring everyone together, we do an update. I always start with the SDR team, always, because I keep telling them, you're at the tip of the spear. You're the one. If you don't do your job, we don't eat. So I used to,
That's right.
and so the way I would back it up to the whole company is I would get them to present first. I told you you're at the front of the line. You're at the tip of the spear. That you're going to go first, And it was a signal to everyone just to, and to that team, you're important. You got to do your job,
Yeah.
and yeah. In the age of AI, lots of things changing. If you are how does a young sales professional? I just get the sense in a lot of jobs, developers, product managers, marketing, but sales as well. There's a lot of uncertainty with the emergence. There's a lot of excitement around AI, but there's also a degree of uncertainty. How should someone prepare for a career in sales in sort of like this age of AI?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of ways. Number one is get really comfortable being uncomfortable. Number two is be an agent and an agent of change. Just be able to adapt. Work on becoming coachable. Work on your communication skills. And then really think about, in general, like if you want to go into sales, like that it is systems and process, not art, that's going to be able to deliver the results that you want. And I think this is where a lot of people fail in sales. And what AI is teaching us, right, is like, it's not like AI is being super artistic, right? It literally is taking the data and the information and then identifying the best patterns. And that's what the best salespeople do, right? Like that's just literally it. And that's not art. That's like literally science. Again, it's a math problem. It's bits and bytes. It's zeros and ones. We just process it in our head.
Yeah. So get used to being uncomfortable. Sort of adopt this learning habit, and actually it applies to everyone, right? Not just the young professional. We're in that time, like if you want to keep working, you got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I love that. That's great. All right, here's something along that sort of learning and advice line. There's some, I've had young people that watch the podcast or snippets of podcasts, and one aspect they always like is like the career advice. Like if someone wants to get to where you are, Will, you're running Maestro Group. I love sales. I love your story. What are some of the things you've learned along the way? A couple of tips that say, hey, learn from what either things I've learned or mistakes I've made. But what are a couple tips of advice you can offer?
Yeah. So the one big rule I tell everyone is this thing we call at Maestro the 40-20 rule: 40 hours to do your job, 20 hours to hone your craft. And so you really, as a young professional, should be thinking about, okay, like when I clock out, that's fine, but like what am I doing to incrementally improve? Like in my craft as a salesperson, in my craft as an entrepreneur, whatever it might be, right? Like what am I learning? What am I reading? What am I doing, right? And so I think that becomes really, really important. Number two is like you're going to fail, and like everyone talks about the spotlight effect, right? Like, hey, everyone's looking at me, I failed. They're not, right? Like
you wish some are, but you wish they paid that much attention to you.
Yeah. It's like, trust me, like, there are public failures, and then there are just failures, right? Like, like, does it suck to, to go and see my family after I graduated law school early and now I'm working at Best Buy making $9 an hour? Sure. Right. Like, like it feels weird, right? Sure. But guess what? Like that wasn't the end. That's not where life ended for me, right? Like there was an opportunity, right? And so, there's a lot of these things that I've learned, which is like the ability to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and just get going quickly matters. Life is physics. Life is momentum, right? And so like if you allow yourself when you get knocked down to lay on the ground for too long, like things don't just happen, right? You gotta go out there and make them happen. And so my story has been one of great rises and complete flame outs and great rise and complete flame. And then what I really learned was like taking myself and my craft super seriously prevented a lot of those flame outs. Whoa, look at that. Daily practice prevented a lot of that. And then, I'll always remember this. So I get fired, start the company, I'm like, committed my wife to spending money on starting this because what we wanted to do was really focus on industrial organizational behavioral psychology. So I need some money to help me like figure out the research behind like sales and what I was doing. And so, and we didn't have money. Like we were like literally like a month away. Like it was a month away from begging our parents to cover our
Yeah.
bills, right? Like
Very little margin.
that was the that was the edge I was on, right? And I remember I woke up the next day and I said, don't do anything silly, don't do anything stupid. And what I was trying to say to myself was like, just remain calm, right? And so what ended up happening was, I got an opportunity like within a couple of days, right, to like go train. And it was going to be a pretty significant amount of my time. And they wanted to pay me a very low rate, like very low rate, right? They said, hey, listen, I heard what happened. I can give you something like we can't, we can only pay you, like $20 an hour, and it's gonna be like 30 hours a week for the next like month. Like, well, that wasn't gonna really do anything for me, right? Like, it just wasn't gonna do anything. And a lot of people in that moment of like, I don't have any revenue, I need to get started, I'm gonna go do something, right? Would have said yes. But that to me would have been stupid because it would have taken away from my ability to prospect, my ability to go out and find opportunities, like all of those things.
Yeah.
And so I said no, I passed on it. And then I ended up with another opportunity. And, I said, well, I did the math, I did the calculation of what I needed for it to work and what terms I needed for work. And I, confidently presented that and, ended up with that. And within 9 months, I'd sold $1 million in services deals.
Wow. That's great.
From launching the company, right? And I think a lot of it had to do with just this idea of calmness, right? That it never seemed like I was desperate.
Yeah.
And so that allowed me to confidently like move forward, right? And I also was creating momentum from the very. So my biggest lesson, honestly, was like you got to remain calm even when it's super dark, because if you start to panic, that's when things just go from bad to way worse, like really fast.
Yeah, that's great.
Right.
What you just said there is part of the reason why I wanted to chat with you on the podcast, because you're not just a sales expert, which you are clearly, but you're an entrepreneur. So you know the ups and downs, you know what it's like to, to have to battle through, and the challenges, the difficulties. I wanted to end with this piece here. In terms of, you're an entrepreneur, it's stressful. We all know what that's like. There are ups and downs. How do you maintain sort of like, how do you relax? How do you get yourself centered so that it doesn't consume your whole life? That kind of thing. How do you do that? What do you do?
Yeah. So again, the beauty of the 40-20 rule, right, is that we also teach that part of honing your craft is identifying how you work best, right? And so how do you de-stress yourself? How do you get yourself into good mindset so that the next day you show up, right? And so I've done a lot of deep practice around that. So there's a couple of things. So number one for me is I have to exercise daily in the morning. I have to be able to do that, right? Like that's going to allow me to center myself. It allows me to clear my head. It allows me to also just get some time focused on whatever that might be, whatever that goal is for that workout. Yeah. So that's like number one. Number two is every 7 days, and I journal. And I write down the moments of the week where I felt I did well and was exceptional, and the moments of the week where I felt like I didn't perform my best. And then I try to identify any sort of environmental factors that may have affected either one of those two. And then, for the ones where I'm doing my best, I want more of that. When the ones I'm doing my worst, I try to figure out how do I minimize that environmental factor, right? Like, whether it's having a late meeting after a long day that's like going to be a difficult conversation. Well, maybe I need to move those meetings to another day, right? And so that allows me to just keep a good positive energy. And then, the other big thing where I like to spend some time is, so you see this like jersey behind me. That's like my son's jersey. I like to spend a lot of time, focused on things that like he's focused on, things that he cares about, right? Those are moments where it doesn't matter whether I'm a sales expert or whatever. Like that doesn't matter, right? Like, it is about like where he's trying to improve or what he's trying to get better at or what he wants to do. I mean, sometimes it's not even about improving, right? Sometimes it's just about like, hey, let's go play, NBA 2K so I can whoop you dad, right? And just being able to like get outside of what it is that I'm doing. And then, the other like, other big thing is, I'm trying, and I've not been very good at this, but 2026 is the year that I get better at this, is I am trying to put my phone away and be
Mhm.
present when I'm supposed to be present.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so important, right? Because I love what you said about your son though. For me, best job in the world to be a dad.
Yeah.
There's no substitute. So well, hey, thanks so much. There, I'm sure are more topics, especially in the area of sales, that I'd love to unpack. But thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, and I'm sure we'll chat again.
No, this was fantastic. Thank you for having me.
Thanks.